hosted by myself and Councillor Fred Grindrod. I'll be chairing this evening, so welcome to everybody. And our committee manager, Kay Thomas, has made all the arrangements. Thanks to her. She's just reminded me, that I need to tell you or let you know that this meeting is being recorded and will be available to view later on YouTube. So hope everyone is in agreement with that. If you have any concerns about that, please speak now. But otherwise, this will be a recorded session, just so that it's available to people after the meeting. Okay, so the main item we've got on our agenda this evening is a presentation from Councillor Nicky Brennan, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner's Victims Commissioner, and also a colleague of Fred and mine on Bournville City Council. So, and Nicky's going to talk about her role as Victims Commissioner and some of the work that's ongoing to combat violence against women and girls. So very pleased that Nicky's here to join us. And I think, Nicky, you're going to talk for 10 or 15 minutes and then leave some time for questions and discussion. So welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Councillor Clements. So as Liz said, I'm Nicky Brennan and I'm Victims Commissioner for the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner. It's a brand new role and the first for the West Midlands, and actually it's a first for any Police and Crime Commissioner in the country. So it's a big honour to have that role. So if I start first by explaining the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner, and then I'll explain my role. So the Police and Crime Commissioner is an elected one. It's currently held by Simon Foster, who was elected in May earlier this year. And the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner is to be the voice of the people and hold the police to account. And the PCC ensures that the police are answerable to the communities they serve. He has powers such as to hire and fire the Chief Constable. PCCs do not run the police force at an operational level, so they can't get involved in everyday policing and individual cases. However, they must ensure that those who are in charge do a good job, and they're there to set the policy priorities. So the PCC decides what the force should be focusing on and what crimes it should prioritise. And this detail contains is in the Police and Crime Plan. And the Police and Crime Plan that Simon Foster has done was published about a month ago, and it's accessible online to read. So once I finish speaking, I'll post a link up into the chat. So if you wish to explore it, you can. The PCC also sets the budget, and the PCC also must bring together community safety and criminal justice partners to make sure organisations work together to fight crime and help victims. And in 2015, PCCs took responsibility for commissioning victim services. So in the West Midlands, that includes things like victim support, which is there to support all victims of crime, and also has a specialist road death and serious injury team, which support bereaved families and their loved ones. And they also commission specialist support services such as domestic abuse, violence against women and girls, hate crime, sexual exploitation, and modern slavery. So that brings us nicely onto my role. So Victims Commissioner is appointed by the Police and Crime Commissioner, and it's a bit like the role of an assistant PCC, but my sole responsibility is on victims and the victims portfolio. So prior to that, as Liz said, I am a councillor. I represent Sparkhill on the east side of the city, and I've been the Cabinet Advisor for domestic abuse since I joined the council in 2018, chairing the Violence Against Women and Girls Steering Group, as well as the Strategic Domestic Abuse Board. And before that, I also worked supporting women in the criminal justice system and supporting domestic abuse victims. So I've got frontline experience, which has brought me a great wealth of expertise to my role. My role as Victims Commissioner is to amplify the voice of victims, understand their needs, and enable them to effectively cope and recover from the harms they experience through crime. Being a victim can be a very traumatic experience, and ensuring victims access to justice is perhaps the most challenging aspect of this work, as sometimes it can re-traumatise victims having to go through what has happened to them or feeling like they've been failed by the services that are there to protect them. However, I'm determined to work with our criminal justice partners to ensure it significantly improves its response to victims. And this need has been compounded by the recent impact of the pandemic on pre-existing court backlogs. We are actually getting more and more up to date in the Magistrates Court. However, there is significant challenges still in Crown Court, with victims often having to wait 3 to 4 years for their crime to be their trial to actually be heard, which can, you know, it can be really, really difficult and cause massive attrition to victims. So one of the key priorities for the Police and Crime Commissioner has been to rebuild our community policing, and that is putting 450 extra officers back on our streets at the heart of our neighbourhoods. And this is a priority that came through very strongly in the extensive consultations in the Police and Crime Plan with members of the public and stakeholders. And I know myself as a local councillor how important our local policing teams are and the difference that those officers can make in a community, not only for tackling and preventing crime, but keeping public confidence and making the community feel safe. So the PCC has made this as a priority, and he wants them to tackle issues such as antisocial behaviour, vehicle crime, as well as being early intervention for crimes such as domestic abuse. A key priority for me as Victims Commissioner is domestic abuse and violence against women and girls. In the West Midlands during the COVID pandemic, it increased by 39%, and it has rightly had a spotlight put onto it over the past 2 years due to the coverage and attention it received due to COVID and the consequent lockdowns. And violence against women and girls did again with the murderous Sarah Everard. What I will say is COVID and lockdown did not cause domestic abuse. That blame needs to sit solely with those who perpetrate those crimes. But the lockdown did create a perfect environment for abuse to flourish in home, as victims were unable to leave their homes, access support, and have that contact with people or agencies that would be able to make interventions and keep them safe. And whilst the messaging was to stay home and stay safe, home is often not a safe place. And it can be very difficult to alert somebody about what's going on when it's difficult to even make a phone call. And I was quite pleased that many of our national organisations, as well as our local organisations, developed online chat facilities which were more discreet and allowed victims to get the support that they needed without it becoming uncovered. So one of the first actions that the PCC had was to double the number of IDVAs from 31 to 64 in the West Midlands, and IDVA stands for Independent Domestic Violence Advocate. I used to be one at Women's Aid, so I know how important and what a big, huge difference they make to victims' outcomes. They're a specialist professional who works with a victim of domestic abuse and develops a trusting relationship. They can help a victim with everything that they need to become safe and rebuild their life. And they represent their voice at a multi-agency risk assessment conference, as well as helping them navigate the criminal justice process and work with the different statutory agencies to provide that wraparound support. We have also commissioned an early intervention stalking and harassment pilot in the West Midlands, as stalking in the West Midlands rose in the last year by 62%. And that project focuses on people who are committing acts associated with stalking but have not yet been sent to prison. It consists of 6 one-hour sessions over 6 weeks with a forensic psychologist, with a view to helping change attitudes before they escalate further. And we've also commissioned a service for victims so they get the support and safeguarding that they need. As well as that, we have just last week relaunched the No Excuse for Abuse campaign as part of our Safer Streets Fund. This is a campaign that is visible all across the West Midlands, including the Bullring, German Market, Broad Street, and locally it is on the Pershall Road. It's in Bournville train station and Kings Norton train station. As we live in a society where 97% of young women have been sexually harassed, and through our Women's Safety Survey, which we undertook with West Midlands Police, we have heard details from women who every day change their behaviour to try and make themselves feel safe, both at home and the outside world. So these are big campaigns, billboards and advertisements, which try to focus on men being upstanders and not bystanders, as all men have a role to play in tackling abusive behaviour and attitudes that are harmful to women. So they'll say things about consent, about not hassling women, as we're trying to say that it's not women that should change their behaviour, and men need to call it out. We're also working with the Violence Reduction Unit within the PCC to talk to pupils in schools about how they treat other people with respect, what is and what isn't appropriate behaviour. And I think it's really important that we teach children about consent and respect at an early age. So we do actually do some nursery intervention with that too. And also me and the Police and Crime Commissioner are going to continue to lobby for misogyny to be made a hate crime. It's quite disappointing that the Law Commission turned that down last week. And when speaking to colleagues in Nottingham who have had, they're actually one of the first forces to record misogyny hate crime, one of the key things that I took away from that was 100% of the women who had reported misogyny as a hate crime would report again. And I think it would be instrumental in building trust and confidence with women and the police. Finally, one other thing I'll mention is work that we're doing on the Victims Code and Victims Code compliance. So if you are a victim of a crime, there are 12 rights that set out the minimum level of service that a victim should receive from the criminal justice system, which they're currently not statutory. And the Victims Code applies to all criminal justice agencies, including the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, court services and probation service. And I'm very keen to hear the voices of victims. They need to be front and centre, as it's been too long that victims have just been an afterthought, and we need to put them at the heart of this work. So currently the Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, has announced a consultation on the Victims Bill. And both me and the Police and Crime Commissioner are very keen that these rights are enshrined in law. So, you know, the victims will get a proper level of service, and anyone can take part in this consultation. So I'm quite happy to pop a link into the chat if anyone is interested. So I've covered quite a bit of information there, and I'm happy to answer any questions the best I can.
Thanks very much, Councillor Brennan. I thought that was a really comprehensive overview of this very new innovative role and its importance, for people across the community, but particularly women and girls. So I'd like to open it up for questions now. And if you put your if you could use the raise hands facility in the team. Sorry, I've forgotten all about the stuff about Teams etiquette at the beginning of the meeting, for which I apologise. But I think just to help people with bandwidth, if you could probably turn your camera off as well when you're not speaking. Just to make it easier, but just open the floor now for questions. Maybe while people are thinking of their questions for Nicky, I'll ask a question. You referred at the beginning to the delays, in the courts, both the magistrates' courts and the Crown Court. And I've seen some really alarming statistics on that. And I just wondered if you could sort of reflect further on what sort of impact that has on victims, as they they have to wait so long for justice.
So I think attrition would be one of the biggest impacts on victims. If you're having to wait a long time for a case to come to court, you may not feel that you want to carry on with it. It may re-traumatise you, and you may just want to get on with your life. So you feel like you need closure and you just don't want to go through it. So victims just feel really kind of let down by the criminal justice system. Maybe they wouldn't report a crime again because they wouldn't have that confidence. Like having to wait. Talking to a victim last week who was in her 3rd year of having to wait for a really traumatic case to come forward. And she just felt like she couldn't move on with her life, and she just as well didn't feel like she had that mental health support, that wraparound care around her. So magistrates now have nearly caught up. We saw a case last week when I was doing a court. I was doing a walk through the eyes of a victim, so I was on a court observation, and that case was just from 3 months ago, so they'd really caught up, but Crown Court haven't, because often their trials can go on for weeks, let alone months maybe, and they just don't have the space to hear those trials.
Thanks, Nicky. I think we've now got a question from Cyril Besant. Cyril, over to you.
Be heard?
Yeah, hearing you fine, Cyril. Go ahead.
Okay, good. Right. As you know, Liz, I consider bad driving, speeding, etc., as antisocial behaviour. Does our speaker consider it similarly?
I do definitely. Bad driving and dangerous driving, speeding can have really, really horrible consequences. With the accidents that are happening, and I also don't think that the sentences are in place properly. If people do cause things like death by dangerous driving, it can devastate a family's life, but the sentences also aren't there too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nicky. Very good to hear an unequivocal statement about that, because I think the harm of speeding and bad driving affects us all, and I know that residents are really concerned about it across the whole ward.
So the Police and Crime Commissioner is working with Birmingham City Council on that currently, increasing the number of average speed cameras, and they're quite keen as well to set up more speed watch groups, which I have seen in Bournville.
Yeah, and I think generally there's a commitment to pursue something called Vision Zero, which is zero deaths through traffic accidents, which is something that's really important, and I think when it needs to go through the policies of all of the public bodies, really. I can see that Councillor Grindrod's got a question. Fred, over to you.
Just to say to Cyril as well, I'm a resident in Bournville. My children go to school in the wards, and I am very concerned as a parent a lot of the time when I walk them home from school about some of the driving and speeds that I see.
Fred.
Thanks. Thanks, Liz, and thanks, Nicky, for an excellent presentation. Really important to hear what you're doing, and also really challenging as well. I think one of the things that you mentioned was that so much of what's happened in the last year has been hidden with people spending so much more time at home, particularly during that lockdown period. I mean, one of the things that I was doing with Pete Richmond from the Bournville Village Trust, with keeping in touch with all the schools who were telling us, some of the challenges they'd found with their families. When things go wrong in the family situation, when certainly appalling domestic violence occurs, how do we as a neighbourhood, how can we help to support neighbours and friends on those issues? Because I guess one of the challenges, one of the things I've noticed emerging from the pandemic is we know a lot more about our neighbours than we did before. Now, in the main, that's great, and we get to know our street, who lives on our street, and how we can come together to tackle shared issues. But sometimes also we become aware of more challenging things in our community. How best do we respond to those, do you think?
So if you thought a neighbour experienced domestic abuse, I would, even if you thought it was nothing, I would make the police aware, because it could be the difference between saving somebody's life. If you think it's an emergency, I would call 999 and let the police know. Or if you don't think it's an emergency, it's definitely worth logging things on 101, or just keeping a log of behaviour that you think, isn't great and is challenging. I think it's always best to be non-judgmental with your neighbours as well. Make them know that you're around, that you're there to support them, that they can always come and talk to you. And if you do think somebody is being abused, just maybe having those kind of open-ended conversations. Is everything okay? How are you doing today? Is everything all right? Just even maybe just asking how somebody is. Maybe the first time they might not answer or say anything, but if you carry on with that, somebody might disclose something, and then if they do, it's about pointing them to the right support services like Birmingham Solihull Women's Aid, who are fabulous. There's an online chat for them now. There's a helpline that you can contact, you can email, or letting them know as well that it shouldn't be tolerated. It's not something that somebody needs to put up with, and it's just about planting an idea in somebody's head that life doesn't have to be that way.
Thanks, Nicky. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nicky. I've got one other. Oh, actually, I can see Chris Barham. Chris, over to you. Your question, please.
Hi, I just think that last question just brought to mind the very, very sad case of Lavinia Jones. Sorry, Hughes. In that case, all sorts of flags were raised. What went? Are things being put in place now to make sure that doesn't happen yet again?
So currently, I wouldn't be able to say too much on an individual case because it's gone to an independent review. So that's been commissioned by the government, so they'll have a look through about everything. But I do understand what you mean about another case again, and the conversation of lessons will be learned. It can be quite frustrating.
Thank
But
you.
I think I will be very interested in following what that review actually says, and I will have some questions of my own.
Yeah, just finally then, if no one else has got any, can I ask you, Nicky, that the campaign that you spoke about, which has got those very high profile posters in the centre of town and on Pershall Road, which is about asking men to be upstanding rather than to be bystanders, is that going to be reinforced by any other work, sort of engagement work? I was just thinking, but sort of men's groups or sports clubs or something, where you can get the message out, to the widest range of men and young men and boys. And how's that going to work?
So as well as it being on billboards across town, it's actually on Spotify too. So if you haven't got a paid Spotify and you have the adverts, it will come up and you have to watch it until it goes away, which I think is very good for our young people that use Spotify. But I'm also in talks with our football clubs across the region, our Premiership football clubs, about doing some work with them in the new year about misogyny in football, as well as kind of, because we have a hate crime service that's commissioned by the Police and Crime Commissioner that goes into on our football games and is there if anybody reports hate crime. But we're looking to expand that out with their grassroots football to do with misogyny and how women are seen in sport and engagement. And we're also doing a focus group with some of the colleges, with boys in colleges, to see what works and what doesn't work for our next campaign, which will happen in the new year.
Thanks very much, Nicky. That sounds all very, very, very positive and in lots of ways of reinforcing the message there. So thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us this evening about this new role. It's very exciting, and I think a real sign of better things to come, I think. So we wish you luck as you continue in the role. And yes, thanks very much. I'm going to move on now. Then I think we were hoping to have an update from Sergeant Gareth Sankey, who's our local police sergeant, and at the moment he's heading up both the Selyoke and Bournville teams. I think he's actually on a rest day today and has got some childcare commitments. And yes, but I don't begrudge him at all having a rest day, because I know how hard he works. So what I'll do then is ask if anyone's got any urgent issues that they'd like us to pass on to the policing team, that we will pick those up as issues that we'll pass on. But otherwise, I'll move on to asking our Kier Highway Steward, Stuart Cross, to talk to us. But if you do have an urgent issue that you think the police ought to be made aware of, do speak now or put it into the chat. Okay, I can't see anyone raising their hands about that specifically at the moment, so I'm going to ask Stuart to just talk to us about the state of roads and pavements in the ward at the moment, and I'm sure you'll be willing to take some questions as well, Stuart, at the end. Yeah, so over to you.
Yep, thanks, Councillor, and as ever, thanks for the invite tonight. So, yep, Stuart Cross, Highway Steward for Kier Highways. For those of you who don't know, I'm sure most of you do, Kier, we're the interim provider for Bournville Highways up until 2023. So, the big schemes, I suppose that's the most interesting ones to talk about first. We have got some ones planned for the new year. So, all of these are carriageway resurfacing schemes. So Ashmore Road and Beaumont Road and Willow Road, all of those will be done in Feb and March next year. So that's resurfacing from one end to the other, which is obviously good news. They're the largest schemes we have in the next 6 months. Other stuff we're doing at the moment, obviously there's a general maintenance stuff which you'll see guys on the network all the time. We've recently done the work on Bournville Lane from the train station to Linden Road, which obviously has made a massive improvement, and obviously recently some work on Hay Green Lane. Kier have been asked to do some work for Commonwealth Games as well, so I'm sure most of you know, or if you don't, if you check out the route of the marathon this year, so that goes a good meander through Commonwealth Games, sorry, through Bournville. So we've been asked to check that route out, and obviously we'll be making repairs ready for that next summer. Apart from that, not much. Obviously, it's winter now, so we're doing the winter maintenance as well. So our doors will be out gritting. It's quite mild at the moment, but obviously the last few weeks we've been out a fair bit, and that's been going okay. Regarding tree planting, not too many trees have been removed in the last 12 months in Bournville. Obviously with COVID, etc., it did have some restrictions on our labour, but I think about 4 trees have been replanted or due to be replanted in the ward. So not too many have been taken out, but whenever we do take one out, obviously one goes back in. So yeah, mostly good news, but nothing else to report on really. Any questions from anyone? Any issues you want to raise?
Thanks very much, Stuart. I think, yeah, lots of good news there, particularly about the resurfacing on Beaumont Road, Willow Road, and the other road. Sorry, the name escapes me, but that certainly some roads which we've been hoping would get some work done on them for a long time. So yes, very good news. I can see Brian Sproul wants to ask a question. Brian, over to you.
Remembering to unmute first. Stuart, you mentioned roads, and they're very important. And when I'm driving my car, they're very important. But when I'm walking on the pavements are very important to me and other pedestrians. And can you tell me where you might be doing some work on pavements?
There's no big schemes at the moment for pavement work, so no particular reason why we're doing some, throughout the city. So there's no preference over pavements or footways. It's basically 2 separate schemes. There's no big schemes planned in the ward on the current programme. There may be some, obviously. These programmes run normally from about September, normally about 12 or 18 months. So from September just gone until probably back end of next year, there's no big schemes. However, we will be doing the smaller stuff. So, the smaller jobs you'll see, if we need to replace broken flags or damaged flags or damaged tarmac, they'll be repaired within 6 months as a maximum. So, yeah, unfortunately, nothing major, but obviously the routine maintenance will continue as they do. I think I mentioned before on previous ones, unfortunately, Bournville is one of the wards where it has a lot of flagged footpaths, not as much tarmac, which can cause issues. So it's a shame where obviously they look good once they go down, but unfortunately when they went down, I know 30, 40, 50 years ago, people's driving habits aren't as good now. So obviously you get the overriding, which doesn't help. So there are quite a lot of roads in the ward that has suffered from that. So yeah, it's a bit of not an issue at the moment, but it probably suffers worse than other wards at the moment, I would say. But yeah, no big schemes, I'm afraid, Brian. But yeah, continual inspection and anything dangerous, obviously we're repairing. So.
Well, I do know that a lady fell over the other day in Cedar Road, and that is paving, and it's particular bad is Cedar Road in Bournville. It's off Bournville Lane.
Yes, I know Cedar Road is one of the roads that we're going to Councillor Greenwood for one of our next walks. It's a tricky one because I've been to Cedar before. I think on a previous ward meeting it's mentioned, and I did go down, and unfortunately there's not too much there that needs, I know it sounds crazy, but meets criteria for repair. The criteria is about 1 inch roughly. Unfortunately, a lot of flags, footpaths when they're driven over, it never quite reaches 1 inch, but there's a lot of smaller ones that unfortunately do catch people out. So it's a bit of a catch-22, but it's definitely somewhere where we're going with Councillor Greenwood in the new year. So yeah, we shall double check that one as well. No problem.
So Stuart, we've got a question in the chat from Anne Venalis, just asking how to report problems with paving stones. So
yeah,
is it then you can report online or report to councillors or report direct to you? Can you just get the advice on the best ways to get the message through quickly as possible? Because obviously pavement problems cause trips and hazards, so we want to get them sorted out as quickly as possible.
Definitely, yes, that's a real good one. There's a good way of doing it. Go to Obviously, you can refer it to your local councillors, but I would always recommend if you go to the council's website, it's pretty good to actually lodge a complaint, sorry, or let's not say a complaint, lodge an inquiry. So it's birmingham.gov.uk, and if you go on there, it's a very easy path to follow, and you'll get a response. You'll have an inspector on site within 5 working days, and yeah, obviously it does help you to actually plot the location where the actual issue is. So the most information you provide, house numbers or lamp columns, that's ideal. But yeah, if you go to the website, you'll get a response, and also you'll get job numbers if you need to. You also get a timeline as well. And if it's deemed an emergency, you'll get a team on site within 2 hours. But obviously depends on what you're reporting, really. But yeah, your standard response is it's a 5-day turnaround, which is pretty good, to be honest.
Yeah, and I was impressed because we did a walk around with you in Cotteridge Centre last Thursday, Stuart, and we picked up some faults there that you thought were urgent, and then you were phoning and getting them sorted out straight away. So I think it is a very responsive service, isn't it? And it's something that Kier takes very seriously. And on the tarmac pavements, on Sunday, I ended up going out after dark for a walk because chores and things had got the better of me. And I do, on Beaumont Road, on the side where there's tarmacking, and on the stretch of Selly Oak Road between Bournville Lane and Merivale Road, particularly in the dark, it does make a difference because I think you just feel much surer underfoot if you're not constantly worried about tripping over broken paving stones. So I can see some more hands coming up in the chat. Colin Thomas, do go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Colin.
Hi. Obviously, safety is very important, the most important thing, but there's also a question of aesthetics. As I think I've said before, I live in a conservation area on Bournville Lane, and we have to keep our houses looking nice. We're not allowed to do things to the front of them, but the pavements are a complete disgrace. You know, not only for tripping hazards, but very rough tarmac, partly tarmacked, and really quite a mess in places. And, you know, I'd actually prefer those pavements to be tarmac than a mixture of broken flags, part tarmac and general mess. And that's both for safety and aesthetics.
I think we spoke before, Colin, and I do owe you an apology because I remember last time I did say I was going down and I didn't. So I know exactly what you mean. So this is just past the junction on Linden Road, is it that section of maybe 20 odd houses? Is that the section we're talking about where you've got a bit of rough tarmac and you've got the flags as well? Is that where we're talking? Yeah,
from Selly Oak Road down to Beach Road and possibly beyond. I'm not quite sure what happens after Beach Road.
I know exactly what you mean. I will go there. I'll go there this week. It's a tricky one because the council's policy for conservation areas is to keep it as a flat footpath as where possible. However, when Bournville Lane will be, you know, on a footway scheme, there will be consultation, and it will speak to residents and councillors and to see what residents want. It's not, doesn't have to be, the default option doesn't have to be for conservation area, the default option doesn't have to be flagged. Obviously, I mean, I drive it not most days, but certainly several times a week, and there's always vehicles parked on half off. It is quite a tight road, I appreciate that, but it would seem a shame to put flags back down, and you know, you can imagine within 6 months they're going to be damaged again. But yeah, but no, I will definitely go there this week, Colin. My plan is I'm going to get rid of that tarmac and just get a new section on the edge there for most of it. I know we did some about 18 months ago, but I'll get the rest replaced, and that'll be done within 6 months, no problem at all. We can get that done.
Okay, thank you. Can I say there's no point in putting flags down if they're going to be smashed immediately. It just as bad as well. I mean, it just looks bad, so it doesn't really help the problem.
And the issue is obviously the original ones that went down probably, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago. The modern ones probably weigh half the amount, half the weight, so they're not as strong. So even though the old ones were built for to be driven on, we did try to take it better. Where the new ones, they're just, I don't know, a cheaper mix, so they don't stand up as well, unfortunately. But never mind.
Okay, thanks.
No worries.
Thanks, Stuart. I can see that Cyril wants to ask another question, but I'm also noticing that Anne Vanalis has put another question in the chat, which I think is what is better for trees, so flagstones or tarmacking. But Anne, if you want to just have a chat to Stuart now in person, please do go ahead. It's your opportunity.
I happen to have tarmac in front of my house now because I think they thought it was better for the tree because the tree was breaking up the flagstones. And so I'm trying to understand what's the environment between what the trees have been planted, which is great, and how the flagstones and how that tarmac all fit together.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So obviously with a flat footpath, you've got the water can, you know, filtered through, which is good. So that's a benefit. With a tarmac, it's non-porous, that isn't an option. However, we do have an option if we see that a tree is kind of struggling, and it obviously depends on the environment as well. So there'd be no roots in the carriageway because it's completely compacted and there's nothing for it to really get into. So really, it's normally just whatever moisture you can find in the footway, or basically in people's front gardens, I suppose. So it depends what people have in their garden as well. So what we can do, there's options, and I think we've done it, if I remember, on Selyoak Road, where we put this. It's like it looks like tarmac, but it's a more flexible material. I think it is Selyoak Road. It's called FlexiPave, where it's a mixture of stones and a shredded tyres and obviously a glue, and that's porous. So if we see a tree that's got some nice amenity value, and we want, but there's the issue with roots, for example, we can put this FlexiPave down. It gets sort of spooned on, and as opposed to a whacker plate where we actually compact it down, it just gets ladled on almost, and it sets pretty quick. So obviously the default option will be tarmac, and most trees, I mean, you know, there's some big trees throughout the wards, and I think of neighbouring wards. You've got Pineapple Road, you know, one of the first council estates, and that's got a whole road of mature trees down there, and they seem to do okay. So yeah, I think trees are quite resourceful, so I won't worry about it too much, to be honest. So yeah.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thanks very much for the question, Anne. Yeah, and for the comprehensive response to you. I think we've all learned something there about, you know, what the different options are on that the flexible material. Yeah, no, Cyril.
Okay, it's only a quick update. I may be out of date. Has the phantom tree freedom person who was cutting all the ties been apprehended or sorted?
Not as far as aware, no. We are going around fixing them where we can. It's an issue now here and really Castle as well. So not as far as we're aware. I've lost track. Obviously we go out, we fix them, but I'm seeing less. So hopefully they've either, I don't know, they've lost their scissors or they've got bored. I don't know, but it is still an issue. But it appears to be. I don't know if the councillors can help me with this one. It seems to be less prevalent, but it is still an issue. I don't know.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I mean, like you, Stuart, I've been less aware of it. When I had that phase a few months ago when it seemed to be, you know, everywhere I looked, and it was just very alarming. But I haven't seen it in any of the new plantings. So let's hope, yes, that whoever was doing it has stopped going around and, you know, committing criminal damage effectively on the tree supports. Any more questions for Stuart? As you can see, he's always, you know, very open and ready to discuss things. So this is your chance. Councillor Grindrod, Fred, go ahead.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you again, Stuart, for that presentation. Stuart, as you and I have done this walkabout of various areas in the ward and picking up issues, it's been really fascinating to learn, you know, things like that issue there about the trees. One of the issues we've had in Cotteridge, I think that, you know, is worth kind of just talking about a little bit, is the fact that the issue of when the council can engage on private land and when it, you know, what's private land and what's council land. It's often caused quite a bit of confusion. We've had a couple of incidents where areas where the council doesn't own the land that residents need us to do something about. I don't know if you want to say a bit about how we go about managing those issues and what we've been doing on it to try and, you know, deal with hazards.
Yeah, sure. So I suppose if I would just give some broad strokes to how Kier deal with that, or Kier, the City Council, I should say. So obviously we can, anything on the highway network we can deal with, that's not an issue. So that'd be obviously vegetation issues, uneven footway, damaged guardrail or damaged tripway or low level fencing, that's not an issue. A good example for Cotteridge would be, I guess, something we picked up on the other week was you've got quite large private forecourts. If you imagine from a Greggs down to Heron Foods, the private forecourt is about 3/4 the size of the actual footway. So on those situations, it depended on the severity. If it's slightly uneven, we can just write to the properties and just remind them of their responsibilities. That, you know, it's your forecourt as a landowner, you've got that responsibility to maintain it. Something we did on our walk last week, I think it was outside Heron Foods, that was quite a bad one. And we got a team there that day, and out of a duty of care, we'd actually do a temporary repair. So we get some cold late tarmac in there, and obviously still right to the shop concerned, but at least we've took away out of a duty of care. You know, that initial issue is we've got to be careful, because you don't want to do duty cares everywhere, because, you know, as taxpayers, we don't want to be spending our money on other people's property. So that's that side of it. Stuff like vegetation, again, we can write to properties. So be that someone's overgrown hedge in the front garden, or a dangerous tree, possibly, that one of our inspectors has noticed and realised, you know, if that was on the highway, we would do something about it. So we would write to the resident and say, or the property, and say, you've got an issue there. What we then do, send a letter. We go back within a certain time, could be 28 days for vegetation. If nothing's been done, we then send it off to the City Council enforcement, and they'll look at it and they'll decide whether or not they want to follow an enforcement point of view. So they could instruct Kier to cut back or to make safe. And yeah, obviously, if the city then want to, they've got the powers to try and reclaim those costs. So from a third party point of view, I guess that's hopefully answered a few questions. Is there anything else you think we need to highlight, Councillor?
No, I think that's helpful. I think it's one of the most confusing things. I guess the final point from me, and I noticed that actually there's another point, because Anne Giles, one of our online, has put an issue about the policy of the use of posts on the road edge of pavements to prevent parking or damage by accidents. And I need to chase that one up for you. I'm aware that that's with regard to the serious incidents that have happened outside the Bournville Quaker Meeting House. So I do owe you a follow up on that issue. I initially got a response and I wasn't happy with it, so I need to push back on that a bit for you, but I will be back in touch on that issue. And the other issue, I think, is we've had a number of requests as we get to the icy weather for grit bins, and I know that there's is there a way that we can get extended grit bins in the area, covering more of our pathways?
Okay, so
sorry.
Yeah, what you need to do on that one is the first thing you can do is pretty straightforward. You can go again to birmingham.gov.uk, and you'll see you have to just search by grit bins or winter maintenance, and it's pretty straightforward to find. So you'll find, first of all, for the general gritting, it will tell you the routes in which our gritters go. There's different priorities. Most of it's priority 1 in the area, but also you can check to see if a grit bin is meant to be on your road. We do audit them every year to open. Basically, at the end of winter, we cable tie, shut them with a cable tie, make sure, otherwise it turns a bit of a dumping ground. Then come the September time, open it back up again, break up the salt, because it'll naturally try and solidify, and make sure it's obviously topped up, ready for winter. If you want an additional one, that would be a recommendation for your councillor to go to his local engineer, and they look at the road classifications, any history of accidents on the road, etc. So I think, because obviously they have to be maintained, there is a reluctance to chuck them out just on an individual request. It has to be assessed and yeah, reviewed if it's worthwhile. I think there was a spate maybe 10 years ago where, or before then, where there was a lot more of a network, and they were just unmanageable, because it's quite easy to put them out, but then there's obviously the maintenance and the costs involved. So I do think the city are understandably quite hesitant to pull them out without any due consideration. So yeah, cut long story short, your local council needs to speak to their engineers, and they'll decide if it's viable, really.
Thanks, Stuart. Anne Giles, did you want to come back? So you're waving.
No, I don't think so. Fred. Fred raised my query, because it does worry me with main roads like the outer circle, how much parking is done, especially at school collection time, and parking goes over the pavements sometimes. And I wondered about those reflective posts in strategic areas, but
yeah, I mean, what we try and do outside a lot of the store, you can't do too much, but you do like the metal fencing, the guardrails, even though it's called pedestrian guardrail, it's not there to protect the pedestrians, it's to sort of stop them from walking in the road, almost, so like to shepherd them in certain directions. I mean, I don't know if it would be useful, but my children go to school in Selyoke. There's been quite a lot recently of, you know, the enforcement cameras where, because there's a section where you can't park outside of a school. So basically the council, they have the guys have a little sort of smart cars with a camera on top, and they put up these sort of A boards and say, you know, enforcement in place. So that might be worth mentioning with the local Bournville Lane possibly. I've noticed it on Radlebarn a few times the last few weeks, which has, you know, been beneficial, I think, so that could be useful.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks, Stu. That's a really helpful suggestion.
I don't like too much street clutter, so I think they're a mixed blessing when it comes to getting past them, and pushchairs and wheelchairs and so on. Their pavement's quite narrow anyway, so
that's it.
I have a mixed feeling about them.
It's a tricky one. You are allowed to park on the pavement, but if you reduce it to less than 1.2 metres, that's when it becomes an offence. You're causing obstruction. So yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one to maintain, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you.
It's getting onto controversial territory there, Stuart, because I mean, we're all waiting for the government, the response to the government consultation on pavement parking, because a lot of us are hoping that we could get the powers that they've got in London to actually ban outright pavement parking, because I think it's an issue across the ward, really. But if there aren't any more questions to Stuart at this stage, I'd like to thank him very much for joining us this evening, taking time out of his evening to talk to us and answer all your questions. And as ever, and I think he's happy to help. And if you've got any questions outside the meeting, either contact him directly or pass on a query to your councillors. Okay, I can see Claire. Have you got? Is it a question for Stuart, Claire? If so, please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you? Oh, good. Can you hear me?
Hello, Claire.
Yeah, great. I just wanted to ask, because I cycle quite a lot, and on the Linden Road, I find, you know, and on Bournville Road, where you've got those little kind of bits in the middle of the road where you can cross the road more easily. No, it's like a little island with a
pedestrian refuge. Yeah.
Yes, that's the one. I really find those quite for cycling. I feel like cars really coming really super close to me when I'm going past them, and I don't particularly helpful for crossing the road either, because I'm often with a buggy or a bike and they don't fit on. I was wondering what the policy is on those. Are you still putting them in, or?
I know which ones you mean. So that would be, I'm not wanting to pass the buck. So Kier maintain them. So whatever's been put in there by the City Highways Department, that'd be for them to decide where they go. So we only maintain them to where they've been installed, really. I'm assuming they're only put in there due to previous, not incidents, hopefully, but maybe a desire to have a crossing point where you can't get a pedestrian crossing, or, you know, something more substantial. So I guess at some point a need was raised. Yeah, there should be a pretty standard design. I'm guessing sorry, Claire, it's a bad line.
You're breaking up a bit, Claire.
I was going to say, are they quite old-fashioned now? Would they even be put in nowadays? Would you be better off not putting in a cycle lane, or making the road a bit narrower and having a proper?
Yeah, I don't know, but to be fair, I can't picture which ones you mean. Are we talking about the crossing points on Linden Road from one side to the other? Is that what we?
I think Claire's. I don't know about everybody else, but I've struggled a bit to hear what Claire was saying because it was breaking up, and I do sympathise because I've got very ropey broadband myself. But I think Claire was asking about the pedestrian refuges on Linden Road. You know, so that, you know, the small islands with the bollard on them. They were put in before Fred and I were councillors, but I believe they were put. The rationale was that they were there as part of a safety scheme to try and slow traffic down.
Okay. And is there any better thinking on those now, or are they still considered a good thing?
Well, it's a very good question. I'm looking at some now. So there's a couple of ones just. So I'm on Google as we speak. That would. I don't know what other options you do really, I suppose, because without putting a full pedestrian crossing in, which, you know, is it required? I don't know. I can see there's a couple. I'm just looking up now. Also, yeah, vis-a-vis concrete ones, there's no actual. The ones I'm looking at is just up from Bournville Lane. I think they're more of a speed ones, I think, as opposed to a refuge. Oh no, but there is one, yeah, near Mary Vale as well. Although there's no dipper curb on either side, so that's a funny one. Yeah, I must admit, you don't see many of those. I think they're more of I would say they're more traffic calming as opposed to a refuge, to be honest, because if they're a refuge, there should be a pedestrian crossing either side on the footpath. If you picture, there's one up by Mary Vale, and there should be a dipper for, like, obviously if you've got a pram or just, you know, a member of the public. So I think they're more of a speed, yeah, a calming issue as opposed to actually a refuge. So yeah, it's a good point, to be honest. Yeah.
Well, I think some of those queries are probably more appropriate for Sajid Khan, who's our local highways engineering manager. So we can continue that offline. I mean, I have had any queries from other constituents who are cyclists who I think are concerned about what the experience is for cycling up particularly Linden Road and Bournville Lane. But then on the other hand, then there's, you know, what it's like for people trying to cross the road. I mean, I'm a pedestrian and a cyclist, so, you know, I'm aware of, you know, the pros and cons. But as I say, it's probably a more appropriate discussion to have with Sajid Khan. So I can just see one, Brian, if you've got, is it a last question for Stuart? Because I do need to move on, I think, at this stage.
Say about the pedestrian refuges. In my opinion, most of the, if not all of the traffic calming measures, some are pedestrian refuges down Bournville Lane and Linden Road, and some aren't. They should all have been pedestrian refuges. And for those that can remember, a number of them had to be moved because they were put in the wrong positions when they were actually installed down Bournville Lane. And the contractor at the time had to come back and move them several metres up the road. But for pedestrians, they're excellent. They may not be too good for cyclists, but they're excellent for pedestrians. Thank you.
Yeah, good point, Brian. And that's what I was thinking, because often, you know, waiting to cross those roads is takes a long time, doesn't it? So, but if anyone's got any further thoughts about that, then do get in touch, and I'll pass them on to Sajid and his team, who do the highways engineering design. Okay, well, so thanks very much, Stuart. You've now taken a huge chunk of time to talk to us, and thanks as ever for your openness and readiness to discuss all these various issues that are raised by residents. And thank you very much, and hope you'll be able to join us at the next ward forum. Yes, have a nice evening.
Yes,
just indeed. At this point, I'd like to ask Kate, is Cheryl with us? I'm just looking down the list, and Cheryl, we were hoping to.
No, sorry, Councillor. She doesn't seem to have managed to join us just yet. She has accepted the invite, so she definitely was intending to be here.
Okay, well, that's just one of those things. And if we move on, then just to, you know, we've got sort of updates for councillors and an opportunity for residents on the call to ask myself and Councillor Grindrod any questions. I think we just mentioned earlier in the discussion that we had a walk around in Cotteridge on Thursday, looking at various issues to do with, you know, the state of pavements and how traders are maintaining the private space in front of their shops, and looking at the various issues. And we're also hoping that the traders, you know, are going to work together on forming a traders association, possibly move towards a business improvement district. Although that's a sort of a longer term project, but traders are getting some support from the council through a piece of consultancy work that's being funded by the government's welcome back funding to try and rejuvenate local centres after the pandemic. So that was all very positive. And I know Fred did as well, went down to the light switch on Bournville Green a couple of weeks ago, and it was great to see people there. And I've also enjoyed going down to late night shopping on Bournville Green. So it's certainly sensing of things picking up again, but obviously we're then heading into this anxious time with Omicron. So I'll hand over to Fred now for any updates.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, and yeah, echoing what you said, really, what a great Christmas lights turn on. We've had 2 of those in Bournville, on Bournville Green, which is a fantastic event. Well done to everyone involved in doing that, in the Bournville Village Council particularly, and obviously Bournville Village Trust. I thought that went really, really well, and it was really exciting. The road was closed and obviously very, very busy, and lots of great eateries and craft fit stalls and everything there for people to enjoy while we waited for the lights to be turned on, and a little bit afterwards. Also, the other thing that I think was really great, Liz, was the Bournville Village Council hosted a craft fair at Dame Elizabeth Hall a Saturday before that, and that was also fantastic, seeing some of our local crafters, I think that's what you call them, with loads of really interesting Christmas there. And then, as you say, the Christmas lights turn on in Cotteridge as well, and thanks to John Cooper from Cotteridge Church, who coordinated all of that, and thanks to everybody that donated to raise funds for those lights and for the tree, which looks really good this year. Yeah, and like you said, Liz, the work that's going on in Cotteridge, we've been doing quite a lot of work with residents and traders, and we brought together with the local police a meeting that unfortunately has had to be put on hold at the moment because of the lack of resource we've got in the police team to continue that. But this was one of the real issues there, was to work out how we connect the traders up again together, so that they come together to see how they can support and work with the council and with the community to do more for Cotteridge. One of the things, of course, that we should remember is that Cotteridge is doing well. It's got a lot of it doesn't have many unoccupied shops at the moment, and we've seen new businesses opening there in recent months. And I've been on a couple of conversations with the guy who's doing the coordination work from the council to talk to some of the traders, and we've had a lot of good conversations there. But we do have some issues there that we need to work on. One of the other things we mentioned about speeding earlier, we've taken petitions to council from Bournville Lane and Beach Road residents, where we've had a good response on the council that we're going to be looking at more work we can do on Bournville Lane, that bit from where Colin was referring to, from Linden Road through down to the Bristol Road, but particularly from Linden Road down to Teasdale Avenue, looking at what can be done there to challenge speeding and to make the road safer for pedestrians and for cyclists. So we're looking to be doing something on that. I've met the project manager now, and we're going to do a walkabout with one of the key residents that's reached out to us in the new year to look at what might be done. We've also taken a petition from a group in Maryvale Road who also have raised issues and concerns about speeding and are looking for interventions there as well. So those are things we've been working on there. I think we've obviously, one of the kind of big successes that we've had recently is working with the Community Partnership for Selly Oak. That they have their meeting tonight, so I know a number of them, the people that not go along to that who would normally join us tonight, are unable to make it. Where the council turned down the planning permission for a developer to build a big tower on the Triangle site, the old Sainsbury's site. That would have kind of completely dominated the skyline and dominated the area for students. The council rejected it as being not appropriate for the location. The developer appealed to the planning inspectorate, and the Community Partnership for Selly Oak, and I worked alongside them, also joined the council in contesting that, and the planning inspector found in favour of the council and the Community Partnership for Selly Oak and turned down the appeal. So what was going to be quite a monstrosity really of a building is not going to happen there. We expect something will come soon, and I know people have raised, although it's not in the Bournville and Cotteridge Ward, it is in, it's nearby, it does borders, it's in the Willie and Selly Oak, the fact that there's a traveller community that moved into there, and I know that the police sergeant who updated us on this at the last police tasking meeting that we had is working on that. But that is private land, and they're waiting for Sainsbury's, the owner of the land, to deal with that issue. So I think that's one to keep an eye on into the new year, Liz, as well. So those are a couple of the highlights of the things we've been working on, but very happy to take any questions if anybody has them.
Thanks very much, Fred. And yes, I thought the the Cotteridge Christmas light switch on was really special, and it was quite interesting on that day, because I had seen on social media a picture of the bare tree on Trafalgar Square, which looked a bit lopsided and generally a bit sad, and then walked up to Cotteridge and saw a really nice shapely tree and a big crowd of people waiting for the lights to be switched on. So that was quite a special moment. So really congratulations to everybody involved in that. So Fred has raised really wide range of issues there. And has anyone got any questions? Because we're both happy to answer any questions from residents on the call. This is your opportunity. Please fire away if you have questions. Anne Vernalis, go ahead.
Langley's Road is divided on many aspects of speeding control, but we would like to be designated 20 miles per hour, and we'd like a sign that says 20 miles per hour. How do we get there?
You broke which road? So you broke up slightly at the beginning, so I didn't hear the name of the road.
Langley's Road.
Langley's.
Yeah, I can put it in the chat if that works better.
No, that's fine. I think Fred and I are both aware of the issues on your road and the fact that it's one way, and people are using it as a route to go down to Bristol Road, aren't they? So, I mean, I think in general, the city, the city council's got 20-mile-an-hour zones, which were brought in 3 areas a few years ago using some funding that came from the Department of Transport. It was actually funding to promote safe cycling. So with a bit of lateral thinking, the council used it to bring in these 20-mile-an-hour zones, and that where they start and finish across our area is a bit arbitrary, but I think it's to do with how far the funding would stretch, because each time you bring in a 20-mile-an-hour speed restriction, you have to have something called a traffic regulation order and special signage. So the council is actually lobbying to have the powers to bring in 20-mile-an-hour speed limits across all residential areas, and that would allow us to have that as the default, and it would mean that we could have fewer signs having to alert people to that specifically. So at the moment, I think what we will do is ask for the Langley's and a number of the other roads like Maryvale Road or Northfield Road, where people are also campaigning for 20-mile-an-hour speed limits to be added to the requests for when the current 20-mile-an-hour zones are reviewed, which I think will be sometime over the next year.
Okay.
Any other questions? Claire.
Question. Hello. Hopefully you can hear me better. I would like 20 miles an hour as well. I was just wondering though, if you just put up the signs, people probably won't do 20 miles an hour. I think you need to make the roads narrower. Sorry if you've covered this. I've got a small child. Mommy Tom. Did you hear me?
Yeah, and I think that you're right. I mean, there's a range of issues, aren't there? I mean, there's implementing a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit and enforcing it, and then what you can do to promote behavioural change. So the narrowing of roads and reallocating road space. I mean, that again is something which is a sort of fundamental part of the transport plan that the council has signed off at cabinet. Because overall, we're trying to make it more possible for people to walk and cycle in safety and do things which encourage people to slow down in residential areas. But overall, the most powerful thing that could happen, I think, for Birmingham and other urban areas would be to get that power to have a blanket 20-mile-an-hour speed limit.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm sure that's a discussion that we can carry on over the next few months, as I say, because we're waiting for for things like the government's response on pavement parking consultation and a number of things which are sort of transport related. So it will be an ongoing concern. Okay, then I can't see any more questions at the moment, so I'd like to thank everybody for joining us tonight, and our speakers, Councillor Nicky Brennan, the Victims Commissioner, and Stuart Cross, our Kier Highway Steward, and thanks to all of the residents who've joined us tonight and asked such great questions. Thanks to Kay for making the arrangements as ever. very efficiently, and just to wish everybody a happy and safe Christmas and New Year. We all hoping for a better 2022. So let's hope that our wishes get fulfilled there. And thank you very much, and see you next year. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye all. Have a good Christmas, everybody.
Happy Christmas. Yeah. Bye.
Everybody. Goodbye.
Good night.